Hello everyone and welcome back to Bayou Reels, which is a YouTube channel for my business BAYOURATT Reel Service. Now we're going to do the reassembly of a Calcutta 200B. Everything's washed. One of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to put just a little drop of oil inside the bearings. I have this sewing machine oil. But if you have something like the Ardent oil, which comes out of the Ardent kits, that's fine as well. I'm just putting the littlest drop that I can. So with the oil being in those two bearings, that's sort of the first two things that I'm going to take care of as low-hanging fruit. So I'm going to take the body of the reel, stick it palm side up, and we're going to be putting this bearing in that hole. What goes in there is these two pieces here. You have this compression plate, this retainer clip, and the 3x10x4 bearing. So I'm going to use my tweezers to flip this over, put that in place, and then you don't have to do this, but I just get oil at the end of the dispenser tube and just barely touch it. I'm going to put the bearing in. And then I'm going to put this retainer clip in. I'm going to put my finger, what I did was I put it in the groove halfway. I'm going to put my finger over that groove and then work it in, so the retainer clip falls into place. Then I'm going to take care of this larger bearing, which goes on the spool. So I'm going to put the bearing on the spool. And so I'm going to get my spool pin that I tucked underneath this paper towel, put that in place, and then use my Bassone pin pusher. Get that started a little bit better. And put this in place. Trying to get that pin sticking out equal amounts on each side, but it does not have to be perfect. That'll work. So first thing that we're going to do right now is I'm going to assemble the worm gear to the front of this frame. And I have all my worm gear and line guide components here. Now on a Calcutta, this can be really frustrating. I'll find it frustrating. But the first thing that I do to get started, and it's going to be awkward to do this in a way that you can see what I'm doing, but I'm gonna I'm gonna take the shroud and I'm gonna slide it through the hole on one from the handle side, and I'm gonna put the line guide, put it through this curved part of the line guide, if you can see that. Of course not. Okay. And then what I do is, there's two white pieces here. Let me zoom in some so you can maybe see the difference between the two. Okay. So it's going to be hard to show up on camera, but this one right here, you can kind of see the edge where it's flat. That's where this retainer plate fits flush and then screws down into the side of the reel here. So if you see that, this screw hole here is for this retainer plate. So you know that this goes on this side of the shroud. So let's call that the handle side. And this other one's going to go on the palm side. Now, to know what their orientations are, right now if I flip them over, if you can see that, I have to put it on my palm here, so you can see that a groove is cut in it. That's the top of it to fit in this shroud on the palm side, and this one has the same thing cut in it for the handle side. So this is where it starts to get tricky, because you have to get it to land on that groove properly. Missed it. Calcuttas take a lot of patience, as well as any of these round Shimano reels. There we go. So next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stick this out just a little bit. I want to stick the, I guess I should have done this on a little bit more centered. I was watching it rather than monitoring what I was doing. Start to stick this through and find where it'll go through the line guide. Then what I'm going to do is, let's see. I'm going to push this through, pushing only on the gear to try to get it to go all the way through. Okay. Now it's alright if that shroud is not quite lined up right. You'll be able to turn it once you get everything together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get that shroud to pop out through this hole, and then pay attention to how the grooves are and try to get those grooves to line up with the shroud as well as fit onto the worm gear. So kind of using my index finger on this side, on the underneath of the reel, I am manipulating the worm gear while I try to pop this on, and there we go. So you know it popped on because it went all the way down and you can see the ring where the E-clip goes. Now this next piece is a little brass washer, which is really a spacer washer. It's made out of brass so that the E-clip, now this is a, compared to the rest of this reel, this is a big E-clip. So then this E-clip's going to snap on there. So next I'm going to grab this E-clip. This E-clip is bigger than all the other E-clips for this reel, in case you get them mixed up, and then it's going to be hard to do this and film this, but pop that E-clip on. Now what I'm going to want to do here, part of your natural inclination is going to want to be to put this line guide pin through, but I would not do that right now. What I would do is I would put the pawl in. So if you notice, this pawl has like two teeth to it, and you want those teeth to be parallel to the two sides of the frame, because that's how you want it running back and forth. So I'm going to take this pawl, you can see the teeth, put that in the reel. You had this little tiny spacer washer that you took out, and then I'm going to put the line guide cap on. Oh, I was doing it off camera there. Tighten this down. Just give it a little bump with the flathead screwdriver. So it's okay if this kind of pops out, because you have it together now, like it belongs. So I'm gonna push that back through. This guide pin, if you look at it, put this to the side, it needs to go through, let's see. If you don't know what side it needs to go through, these two ends are different sizes. So what you can do is you can kind of check it. So one end does not fit in either hole. So because I know that this plate goes there and this end fits in that plate that this one needs to go, so you can, I use my middle finger on this hand to move this back and forth and to push this into place. Hold it in place here, and then I'm going to sort of guide it. I'm going to guide it. I keep doing shit off camera. I'm going to guide it in place here. So now that that's down, maybe if I zoomed out a little bit. So now that that's down, I'm going to take this plate and I'm going to set this in place. Oh, I got that upside down. God dog it. And the pin fell out. Good job. Well, I did say that Calcuttas are frustrating. What's even more frustrating is that I keep doing things off camera, because my body positioning that I normally use to do this work, I don't have to worry about that, and I tend to do things close to the chest because I'm trying not to lean over too far to stick my head in. Anyways, so now that that's in place, I'm going to take this little screw here and I'm going to screw this plate into place. Now the worm gear's done. Next, I'm going to work on the thumb bar. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this is really frustrating. This is one of, besides the worm gear, which you just watched me power through, is this thumb bar and the way this thumb bar works. So what I'm going to do, because you can't even see everything because I'm not zoomed out. So some of the things I like to do, so I have some 00 grease here. I'm going to take this thumb bar wear plate, and the inside has the raised groove on it. I'm going to take just a little bit grease and dab it on there to hold it in place. It goes on the inside of the reel here. So I'm going to do that first. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the thumb bar in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thumb bar and I'm going to kind of roll that in and try to hold it up against the handle side plate while I take this bar that has the machine downside and try to push that through the bottom and get that lined up. See if I can push that all the way through. So the next piece is going to be this little tab. You can see the raised ring here goes on the inside, and that little, I don't know how well you can see that, but this bottom piece here goes over that pin that we just put in. And I dropped it like this. Nope. The problem with Calcuttas is that you have to hold things together while you're trying to continue to put things together. And if one thing comes out of alignment, it's not going to stay. Now to go with this is you have this small little brass washer here, and then an E-clip here. Sorry, my tweezers are, I can't get them to demagnetize. So I put a C-clip in place, and then what I'm going to do is snap it on. Okay, so now that's snapped into place. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put together the set plate. The first thing on the set plate that I'm going to put is the cam stuff together. The first piece, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grease all the inside of this set plate here, because it's a lot of moving parts. I got some light 00 grease, which I find works really well in fishing reels. So the first piece to go in is this arm, which interacts with the thumb bar that we just installed. So you have to go in from the underneath. There's this groove, this slot. So you have to put this into that groove, and it lands just right, because it has its own groove on the inside. Okay. Now, next I'm going to put this kick out arm on the spring. So you see this little tab with the hole at the end of it goes on the spring that's still in the set plate. So what I want to do is make sure that that spring lands in that hole, and then push this down. You're probably going to want to hold it with your thumb. There's this pin here that is for this spring, which interacts with the cam, and if you remember, there was this little brass insert. So this pin goes in from the bottom. This cam, if you flip it over, there's two little tabs sticking out. See if I turn it like this. You see those two tabs? So one tab has to land inside of this curved plate, which is for the thumb bar, and the other tab has to land inside the hole of this kick out arm. So let's see. So this takes some maneuvering, and what I try to do is I try to get it in the kick out arm first as best as I can, and then twist it until it lands in the thumb bar plate. Now from here, I kind of keep my finger on it. I'll put that brass tab pin back in the hole that it goes in. If I can roll it just right. Nope. So put this pin in from the bottom with the ridge in it pointed up, and then what I do is I put the spring, I rotate everything as far clockwise as I can. The tab of the spring fits into this brass insert, and then I take a small pair of toothless tweezers. The pin fell out, and the spring fell out. This is why Calcuttas are frustrating and why I charge more to work on them. That pin will not stay in. God dang it. Oh, I just used my finger. So once you get the spring on, it should hold the pin in place. Now that that's in place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this retainer plate on. Line up those holes. Where are those holes? Lost track of where they were at. There we go. So I'm going to put this first screw in here. The second screw in here. Now that should hold everything in place. So that system's on. We're going to put the pinion gear and the yoke and the two springs on afterwards. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is to put the drive shaft on into the set plate. So you're going to need a couple of things. You're going to need these brass rings. You're going to need this brass set piece. You're going to need that idle gear. You're going to need these two E-clips. So the big E-clip goes with the big gear. The small E-clip goes with this small gear. So this is what we're going to do first. This didn't really come out clean inside them grooves, but it looks pretty. Oh, it's stained. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this little idler gear. It goes on this brass post, okay, and then this small E-clip here is what holds that on. So you can snap this E-clip on, and then next is going to be this drive shaft. You're going to want to take the white gear that goes with it. Okay, you're going to notice that one side is countersunk. That countersunk side goes down towards the set plate. So you're going to put this on the drive gear. This gets, oh, that's the wrong washer. This gets the smaller brass washer. Nope, got that wrong. This gets the large brass washer inside of it. That's right, because it almost fills up the whole gap of the underneath of the plastic gear. Now, this brass insert, if you flip the set plate over, you can see where there's a groove, a flat groove at the top that fits inside of that groove. And then you want to kind of put your finger on the edge of it and push the drive shaft through it. And then what I do is I push down with the drive gear touching the tray. And then I'm going to put this washer on it. We can pop this E-clip on. Nope. There we go. Now you can see how on this set plate, when you turn this drive shaft gear, that the two idler gears interact with each other. So what I do is I take my double aught grease, put a little bit on a brush, and I'll put it on these gears and start to turn the gears. Just getting a little, make sure I get it in the teeth of the gears. There we go. Okay, now this next part is just a little bit tricky. Surprise. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your ratchet gear here, and you also are going to want this anti-reverse pawl. If you notice this pawl, and if I can zoom in a little bit to maybe show you what's going to happen here. So if you see that pawl has a gap in it, right? And what happens is this ratchet gear fits in that gap and it stops it. So when the reel's turning in its normal direction, this thing is rolling over them. But when it tries to go in reverse, this stops it. So what you're going to want to do is when you look at that pin, I'm trying to fix the lighting here. So if you see this pin, this silver pin here, that's where this hole goes here. Okay? So what you have to do is sort of, what I do is I get the pawl on the ratchet gear inside of one of the grooves and I hold it together, and then I slide them both on together and down, going kind of slow, and then I'll hold that ratchet gear with my thumb until it sits on the drive shaft. So it's the top of the base of the drive shaft is keyed square, and it should fit on a drive shaft good. So if you look at this anti-reverse pawl, you can see there's usually pressure on it, but you can see how it's letting it go forward, but it's not letting it go backwards. But what we can do is we can go forward but not backwards. Now a lot of Shimano's, especially from the 90s and early 2000s, have this feature, not just Calcuttas. Alright, now we're going to get into putting the drag washers and the drive gear on. We zoom out a little bit. Okay, so you have these two drag washers. This one is going to go on first. What I have here is some Shimano brand drag grease. And what I do is I make sure that my hand's clean. And I'll just get a little dab on my fingers, kind of touch my fingers together, and then rub it into this drag washer. You don't want to overcoat it. This is really just to prevent it from burning up. So the small one goes on top of the ratchet gear. Now the next thing that I do is I take this drive gear. Now I already inspected it, but what I do is I look at all the teeth to make sure there's no chips, there's no cracks. I took a wire brush to it just to make sure I cleaned everything out of those grooves. And then what I have is one of these Daiwa Space Age greasers. I have one of these Daiwa Space Age greasers. And what I do is I run a bead on the gear like this. And then I take my finger and I kind of roll it and push that grease into the teeth, making sure that it stays in that area. If it kind of starts to drip over, I'll push it from the inside out off. And you don't have to do the whole thing. You can maybe go halfway, maybe a little bit less than halfway, because whenever it turns, this grease is going to get spread throughout, and you don't want to put too much grease because you can overlube these moving components on these reels. So what needs to happen before I put this drive gear on is that I have to put this yoke plate and pinion gear in place. And so if you look at this yoke plate, there's these two sort of indented and ramped sections. That part goes down. That's the underneath. This is going to have to go, that part has to go down, and the opening where the pinion gear sits faces the drive shaft. So what I'm going to do here is on the underneath, I'm going to put just a little bitty dab of 00 grease, because that's where they're going to slide. Flip this over, put the pinion gear on, and then slide it onto the two posts, making sure that the pinion gear lands in that hole. Now this is probably going to have to go down level, but now that that's on, I can take my main drive gear, start to put on the drive shaft, and make sure the pinion gear is upright using my index finger. Push the drive gear all the way down. Now from here, I make sure again that my fingers are clean. I make sure there's no blue grease where there shouldn't be. So I clean my hands again. I get another little dab of Shimano drag grease, and I rub it around on this drag washer. This drag washer is going to sit inside of the drive gear. Okay. And then this metal washer fits on top. Now that set plate is almost ready to be reassembled to the side plate, but the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to have to put this anti-reverse bearing back into this side plate. So in order for you to know which way this anti-reverse bearing goes, if you notice it has it's got flat sides or raised sides to it, except for on the very bottom there's a smooth ring. That ring goes down, and you should be able to push this into the reel from up top. Then, okay, and then what we're going to need to do is take a look in there real quick. So now that you have the anti-reverse bearing back in, you need to put this other 3x10x4 bearing in there, which is, this one is a new bearing that I'm replacing. You just kind of get it in until it slides in past flush, because you have to put this retainer clip in. Kind of go in at an angle, snap it in with my fingers, but I'm kind of used to doing it that way. I would not suggest doing that until you get used to it. And then the spool tension cap goes back on here. I usually just put it on, once I get it lined up, I usually just put it on a couple of turns, not nothing too hard. So now that this plate's ready to go, you need to do two things before you can screw it on, which we have the two screws here. Okay, you have to take the shaft sleeve, which is keyed. If you see those two teeth on the underneath, they fit inside these grooves on the top metal drag washer. So you need to put that in place. Then you need to take the two post springs. You need to put the two post springs for the yoke plate on the post. Okay. This one has a little bit of a bend to it. Okay. So now that that's on, you need to pay attention to where things need to line up, especially these two screw holes here. So as you come down, you need to line up that anti-reverse bearing and then get the post to line up right. So the top of the, one of the things you can use is the top of this anti-reverse pawl lines up with this hole here. So once it kind of snaps into place, you're gonna hold it together with one hand, and you're gonna, or you can set it down. This is probably the best thing to do. Set it down and hold it down tight. Get you a screwdriver and the screws. Oh man, Calcuttas are not enjoyable. First screw down, get the second screw down, get them a little turn. Okay, so for now you can set the handle side of the reel to the side. We're going to take the frame of the reel and the side plate, as well as the little E-clip for the side plate. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to push this pin through the frame of the reel. Okay. Now when you push all the way in, the slot where the E-clip lands is up a little further. But what I try to do is I try to let it out with my finger till that groove is close to the frame of the reel where that E-clip catches it. Try this again. Well, you can see how frustrating this is, and that's because I'm trying to hold the frame, and as my hand tightens to hold the frame in place, I'm squeezing the side plate, which is spring loaded, so it's going back and forth, and it's not let me get this E-clip in. Ah, there we go. Now the E-clip's in. Alright, so now we are very close to finishing this reel. So if you remember, this reel was missing a few pieces when it came in. So I ordered them. nut. So, the first thing that we want to do is put the spool in. Okay. Now, there's a trick to these, to putting these set plates back into the Shimano Calcuttas. So you have to make sure that this thumb bar is all the way up. Then you have to make sure that this plate here, this plate, this little arm plate, is all the way down. So you have to basically disengage the brakes. So if you saw it, push it down. Making sure that thumb bar stays up. Put the spool shaft into the where the pinion gear is. Kind of push it on now. You're gonna have to kind of make sure everything lines up right. Which something seems off. So let me do that again. There we go, that's much better. So once you get that side plate on, you can turn down on these two side plate screws. And then I'm going to give them just a little bit of a tighten with the flathead screwdriver. I'm going to line up the palm side plate back up and use the little knob here to tighten on it. There we go. I'm going to turn the handle to release the brakes. Next, what we need to do is we need to take our two preloaded drag washers. So these are built like a set of parentheses, and this is how you want them to go in the drive shaft. If you can see that they're curved. So one up, one down. Put our drag star on. Then you have a friction washer, and then our handle, and then the nut. Oh, my eyes are playing tricks on me. So put the nut on. Now, there's one thing that we need to do here, and that's to put some grease on the worm gear in here, which is one of the things that I use my Daiwa Space Age greaser for. So I'm going to start to put some grease in there. Turn the handle, move the line guide to the other side, put some grease in here, move the line guide to the other side, and I'm going to do this probably twice on this reel, just so that grease gets mixed up in there good. Turn this handle a little bit, or we could put the nut retainer plate on. So you kind of want this to be snug tight, but you also want to be able to make sure that you're getting this nut to land appropriately. This nut retainer, line up that hole, put the screw, and get a flathead screwdriver, put that on, give it a little tighten, and then kind of one of the first things I do is I tighten the drag all the way down, check it on the spool, loosen it up, check the spool by pushing on my thumb, tighten it down again. It's working real good there. Back it off a little bit, and then I'm gonna turn this handle some, listen if any noises. This thumb bar is working right. Oh yeah. You can hear it spinning. That's actually really good for a Calcutta. Tighten the spool tension up good. I think that this would maybe spin longer if I didn't really pay attention. So it looks like about half of the brakes are on. There we go. This reel's a little worn out. That's spinning pretty good. That's still spinning. There we go. Put it next to the microphone so you can hear it. Pretty good. So what I do right after is I just kind of turn the handle a few times, several times actually. Gets that worm gear grease mixed in pretty good with that line guide going back and forth. It gets the grease on the main gear and the pinion gear interacting real well. And this reel's done. That's pretty good for a beat up Calcutta 200B.